Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Sitting Down with Scholars. I'm Jordan, and I'm joined by Kyle Kabasares. So, Kyle, can you start off by telling myself and my guests a little bit about your career in research so far?
Sure. It's been about almost precisely 10 years, actually, since I started doing research, a little bit longer, but I'd say my first research experience was in university 10 years ago, in 2015. So rapidly going through it, I did a bachelor's in physics at the University of California, Merced. I was in a experimental nanoparticle kind of lab for about two years. And I also did a research internship at NASA in 2016. That was a bit different. It was doing kind of like atmospheric chemistry modeling and research. Then I went to graduate school at the University of California, Irvine, starting in 2017. So I just went right from university to grad school. And there I did a PhD in astrophysics, and the dissertation topic was supermassive black holes, specifically on dynamically weighing how massive these things are at the centers of massive galaxies. And so I was using telescope data collected from this telescope in Chile known as ALMA and the Hubble Space Telescope to build these models that we could essentially apply and fit to the data that was seen to get a measurement of how massive the black hole in that particular system was. And so I was at the University of California, Irvine from 2017 to 2023. Then I had a bit of a transition. So I now work, and starting in 2023, after my PhD, I started working at this organization known as the Bay Area Environmental Research Institute. And it's at the NASA Ames Research Center in close to Mountain View, California, but not technically Mountain View, California. But there I'm in the Earth Science division, and so I am effectively making a lot of maps, specifically of California, to try and make the state more resilient and safe to natural disasters like wildfires. And so I've had kind of a really winding, nonlinear research journey, but that summarizes it, I think.
Okay, so two areas because as most people who are listening will be able to probably think, those are two very what sound very distant research areas from very Earth focus to interstellar focus. Uh, so to start off with, on the black hole uh, side of it, how does one go for it? Because I presume from my limited understanding of astrophysics that it's the displacement of light and various things. But how do you basically identify a black hole, well, a black hole, supermassive black holes, and generally looking at that?
That's a good question. So most supermassive black holes we can't directly see in terms of because they take in all the light and there's like an event horizon which once something crosses, you can't peer beyond that. Those scales are just way too small for in extragalactic sources that we can actually see. But we have evidence of, for example, uh, gas that is at the very centers of these galaxies that tend to be moving at speeds that are unrealistically high if it were not for some massive invisible object in the center of the galaxy. So you can just sort of imagine like a rotating disk, like a CD of sorts, like a very thin kind of disk. And these disks in space have physical extent in 3 dimensions, but one of the first things we do is model them as just sort of this thin disk thing. But basically, you have these like thin disks of gas that are moving really fast at the centers of galaxies, but there's not really an obvious massive source of gravity there. And so, kind of like how we know the mass of, let's say, the planets in our solar system, just based on working out the orbits of planets around the sun, and because we know, for example, how long it takes a planet to go around the sun for an orbit, so we can measure how fast it's moving, and we can work out, how massive the sun is based on those parameters. We can do a very similar kind of analysis with black holes, where we have gas that's in rotation around this this dark, invisible. I don't want to say dark matter because it's a separate thing, but
Hmm.
this black hole, and we can just measure how fast it's moving, and we can estimate based on how fast the gas is moving, how massive the thing interior to the gas has to be. And so that's how we work it out.
Okay, and on the side of how you, so I suppose one thing that for anyone who's transitioning from research into industry related space,
Mm.
which is where I would see you as now. What skills have you brought from the direct field and I suppose the non-direct field specific skills, so your transferable skills that you took from just the PhD in general? How have you applied that to uh, looking at environment more like you say the environmental side of California's resilience?
Yeah, it's I would say there's some things that transferred over pretty well. I mean, programming was a big thing. I programmed in Python in graduate school, and when I started my job, I also was doing a lot of Python, and I had a very similar setup at my current workplace as I did in grad school. So my desk kind of setup, I always usually have two monitors, and I usually have a an Apple machine, and so that was basically almost mirroring each other. Um, but in terms of like the science, critical thinking and just there are just sort of some general things I think you learn as a scientist that are very just generally applicable as you move between fields. So knowing how to just think critically, how to estimate things rather quickly, how to analyze data with programming language, astronomy and remote sensing, which is what I'm in now. I mean, it's all about you using data from some sensor that's just observed usually some source of light from an object, whether it's reflected light or emitted light from, let's say, an object in space. But both there was a lot of transferability in that sense. And having done physics, I think that helped a lot because I could just sort of understand like the basic physics of the situation, how things are kind of collected in, of how like the data is collected in my field now. But I would say that yeah, there was definitely a big learning curve in the transition just because it's like a new field, there's new vocabulary. Um, it's just kind of getting up to speed on a completely new discipline. But I think having done a PhD, you have just built a lot of um, you've just practiced a lot with doing something like that because you often just start as kind of like a novice in your PhD dissertation topic anyway.
Hmm.
And so in some ways it wasn't completely starting from zero, but it definitely was a bit of a transition for sure. So yeah, I think what mostly transferred over, I think.
I get that. And I suppose the other thing I'd love to know a bit more about is what really, well, either drove you down either your PhD research topic or your professional area now. Equally, you
Yeah.
can answer both or one or the other, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, so what drove me for the PhD topic was that I read this book. It was A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, who was a famous British physicist.
Hmm.
And it really, I read it in high school, and it really just got me excited about things in space, and particularly black holes. And when I went to university, I unfortunately was at a school that didn't have a lot of astrophysics presence, or basically any astrophysics presence in our physics department. They do now, since I've left, but they're a very young school. So I knew that I was really into space astrophysics, but I just didn't get a chance to do that in college. So I had to like just fill my research time and experience with what was available to me. And then when I went to go get my PhD, I actually was thinking when I first got there that I would do something very similar to what I was doing as a university student in kind of this laboratory experimental setting. Then I realized I really didn't like that. at all. I mean, I don't know. It's weird looking back because I think in the moment it made a lot of sense, but when I thought about it some more, I was like, I really just don't like being in the lab. So I think it's a bad idea to probably commit to 6 years of being in the lab. So then I was like, okay, well, I got to figure out something else to do. And then I went through this really extensive search process at UC Irvine to find an advisor who I thought I could uh, work with and find a topic that was really interesting to me. And I just happened to find my PhD advisor, who was an expert on black holes, and he was a very relatively normal person. Uh, I would say. And so I think we got along. He needed a student. I needed an advisor. It was just a really good match. And so that's why I went on and did what I did at for my PhD. And then for professionally, like why am I doing what I'm doing now? It's a couple of reasons. I don't think it's really one particular reason, but one big one was definitely I think by the end of my PhD, I was feeling a bit burnt out with things that are really cool, but I just feel like have no had no real like let's say practical application where I felt like, the wonder and the discovery is awesome and it's really cool to say you're the first person to like discover something in space about a black hole. I always thought that was really cool, but I really wanted to move into an area where I felt like my work was having kind of a more direct impact on people and in their lives. And so this current job that I have now, it's actually a really funny story. Was I didn't have anything lined up after the end of my PhD, and so I was just searching for jobs afterwards. And my father was just bombarding me with all these job ads, and he sent me the one that I'm currently working now. And before then I was just getting kind of frustrated because I'm like, gosh, there's like 30, 40 ads a day. But finally this one came along. I was like, oh, Dad, this is actually a good one. Like I should possibly try and apply for this. And the company that I work now for now is the one that they actually run the internship that I did in 2016 at NASA, and so I still had a connection in my network to them. So got on the email, just asked my former boss, "Can you put in a good word for me? I'm really looking for a job. I kind of need a job." And she came through, and the rest is basically history. I mean, there was a lot of that summarizing several agonizing months of knowing whether or not I got the job or not. But yeah, that's I think a summary of it at least.
Yeah, I definitely think for, like you say, the post PhD experience, I definitely feel your pain. I know a lot of other
Hmm.
PhD students that I've met and spoken to that have similar experiences where it's like, okay, so now what? I'm both very qualified and yet not qualified enough. I need either 3 years experience of this or I need this. And like you say, you have the burnout where I was actually reading something where it said basically there's a myth around the PhD related skills. So shows that you are someone who is so hyper focused and able to apply your learning to virtually anything, and you're really adaptable. And then virtually everyone who I've ever met will say, okay, so I went for a job interview. They are looking for PhD related positions, and they want your PhD to be exactly in the area of focus that they have. And whether that is a particular element of science, particular element of humanities, and it's like you think to yourself, how on earth can you put out an advert where your niche that you want for the postdoc or the position is so small, and yet they will still have over 100 people applying for that position, and they will manage to find someone who's close to that, and you think, how on earth is someone's the chance of having a direct PhD to postdoc, whether those two specialisms, unless you're going from the same lab to the next lab in its progression, is to me it seems really improbable, but it does evidently happen in academia, and like you say, that leads to a lot of the issues that people face where they find I've got to find something to do because at the end of the day I have a passion for not starving. So, which regrettably is what most people's job hunt really looks like, regardless of PhDs or not PhDs. But yeah.
I agree. I will say that the my predecessor actually in my PhD group uh, did have a very uh, direct like PhD to postdoc transition, but it is because of our extensive academic network. My PhD advisor is a pretty well respected person in the field, has a lot of connections. So my predecessor at UC Irvine went to do a postdoc with one of his predecessors, who was also part of my PhD advisors group, one of his earliest students, and she became a professor at another university. You know, had her own lab, did very similar research to my PhD advisor because obviously there's a major influence
Hmm.
there. And so my predecessor, and she had funding at the time to go take a postdoc, and so it just so happened to work out for him that well. And it's funny that we're having this conversation today because I literally was on the phone or on a video call like this yesterday with one of my successors in the sense that he joined after me. He's currently the last remaining graduate student in my PhD advisors group that was there when I was there, and he himself was just expressing just his struggle to find the the right position for him to do next, whether that's in industry, whether that's in academia. Based on talking to people in academia, there are people who have told him directly, "We would love to have you. We just don't have any funding." Or the postdoc, if he doesn't know the people directly and he's just trying to apply kind of cold, it is kind of in this, let's say, niche area that he doesn't really have that particular experience through his PhD, but I'm sure would be very capable to learn it and whatnot. But I do think this kind of bottleneck in the transitory stages from like PhD to, let's say, working professional is is a problem. And I do think that in many ways, I think there's some level that I think there is sort of personal accountability and personal responsibility, but I think there's also an aspect of like systemic almost ignorance or negligence, I would say, maybe from the departmental or the university's end, because in some ways I think there is this kind of fragilizing of the scholar if they want to take their talents either in a different direction or in the same direction. In the sense that universities at the end of the day are being are and graduate programs specifically are trying to produce scholars in that field. They're not necessarily trying to produce, let's say, industry professionals. um, but unfortunately, that pipeline through the PhD, there's only a very small fraction of those students who will ever go on to be a faculty member in any capacity. And so this kind of disconnect, and I think some universities are trying to fix it up in the best way they can, but I think largely overall, there's still this gap that needs to be bridged.
Oh, I thought yeah, I was thinking about PhD succession planning actually in a conversation I had with my predecessor.
Hmm.
And one of the things that we were talking about was so he ended up in a what he would class as a very privileged position to some degree because he went straight in.
Hmm.
A similar point, PhD, there was a postdoc position pretty much there, straight in, very easy, linear pathway. He does recognize that he is the exception within our group. But one of the things that he also highlighted, and when we were discussing this, was a lot of the problems that you have is when you have a topic area. So your supervisors, particularly if it's something that they found funding for, they find the funding for your PhD position at the time, but then there is no system in place where they have to then find, okay, so where do you go next? Because if you were going into most other positions in industry, you would go in at whatever level. Yeah, sure, you might be waiting for that person to move up or to retire or whatever, but there is a linear step up in your career pathway. That doesn't exist in the PhD in a lot of cases because they might not apply for funding for that project to go further. They might not look at that area anymore. There's no sideward step for you to move from one project to another. like you say, it's a cliff edge in a lot of cases, and then you are very highly specialized, but also unspecialized for other pathways. The other side of this is, I would say, if this was someone who was doing a self-funded PhD, they found a topic, they thought to the idea, they found their own supervisor. That I would say is a very different category because you're pursuing your own research area. Someone that doesn't necessarily mean that school, university is particularly wanting you to pursue that pathway. So to some degree, if you went down that route, I would say there's less ownership on the university to do anything with it. But if you're going down the other pathway, you would think a development universities should have some form of at least a developmental insight to provide for the PhD student when they get to that stage.
Yeah, two things actually. One, it's interesting. I actually was in I shared an office with someone who I believe self-funded their PhD, which was kind of unique. He was an older gentleman. I think he was probably in his mid 50s when I had joined, and I was like 23 when I joined. So we're talking of like maybe a 30-year age gap between me and him. But he was a very successful businessman and engineer in his prior career, and he just wanted to learn more about dark matter for some reason, and so he came to UC Irvine to study dark matter. And I did envy him in some ways. I was like, wow, you know what? Maybe he was onto something here. Like he doesn't seem to have to deal with a lot of the ridiculousness that typical graduate students have to deal with just because he's self-funding himself, and so he's not really at the mercy of, let's say, the department or even his PhD advisors whim. And I thought, wow, that's actually really cool. I wish I could have done that, but I guess I could have, but like I was like, well, I'm already here. I don't think I want to wait 30 more years to do this. But yeah, I would say that uh self-funding one's PhD, if it's doable, did seem kind of nice. The second thing I will also say is that in in hindsight, I had this encounter, and I've talked about this on my YouTube channel a few times. But basically, when I was a first year student, one of the eldest faculty in our whole department came to give a seminar to us first year PhD students. And they basically just coldly said, most of you are probably not going to go and be a professor. And I'm saying it in a nicer way than they did. They were kind of just like, you're not going to be a professor because you're going to this school, basically, and you're not going to another school like I did that happened to be let's just say a little bit more elite or a little bit more prestigious. Um, and I just remember in the moment, a lot of us were kind of just like looking at each other and being like, did we just get like pranked or something? Is this like a joke, or are we like we're just getting kind of told like we have no future in the system? And in the moment, it felt really cruel and made a lot of us upset. But in some weird way, looking back on it now, I do kind of see what this person was trying to tell us. I don't feel like the message was delivered in the most kind way, which is unfortunate. But I think I think one thing that would really help people, at least from like a psychological perhaps point of view, is that just acknowledging that the odds are long if you want to pursue if you want to like go down like an academic route. I mean, of course people are going to get there just because there are going to be some people who are just going to get there through one way or another. But not everyone will. And I think that's just the reality. And I think people just have to be aware of that when they pursue such a path, that it may not work out. And perhaps it might just be more prudent to have some plan Bs in place earlier rather than later, which I think I didn't really start thinking about plan B until like, let's say year 4 or 5 of my PhD out of 6. So things were, closer to the end than they were at the beginning.
Yeah, I think like you say, I think one of the things that stands out to me was more around the likes of one, the skills that they want you to do for various different industries. So I've always enjoyed teaching, so teaching was an area that I was more than happy to go back into. But problem with that, to teach at university level, they want you to have done X amount of classes. That's great to know, when you have 2 years left of time to get that experience in. When you're at the end, and it's like, okay, we need you to have 2 years worth of teaching experience in universities. I mean, I've taught at college level before, but
Mm.
not as much at universities. And whilst I've got some, probably more than a lot of people, but you think to yourself, well, what if someone gets to this point and they don't have that? They need to get experience, but they can't get experience because they need experience. That thing that doesn't seem to ever be addressed in any industry, academia, no, by no means any different. And I think the other side of it that again, unfortunately, stands out to me is we had a similar discussion by a PhD student who came into us, well, postdoc who came into us very early on, and they said, yeah. So if you think of there's maybe I think they said 1% of the population has a PhD or something to that effect, and of that 1%, 9% of all PhDs will go on to an academic position, and that number has got lower each year. It's like, okay. And the reason for that is what you're basically you're boot filling. You're waiting for someone to fall out of their boots, but either by leaving, forced retirement, or death. And you're hoping to jump into those boots. That's how academia works. So unless you all follow, they worded it really gallows humor, saying unless you're following around a very sickly person, the probability of you getting into that position is very low. But if you do follow around someone who's particularly sickly, your probability goes up. I'm thinking, yeah, that's not the best way of picking your job basis to follow around someone who's. But yeah, I thought so. Yeah, similar to yourself, they put it in a more comical way, but it was rather interesting. The only useful bit of advice they did give though was if you can find a niche the industry likes that you're good at that academia is likely to invest in. So in my case, agriculture seems to be that. The parallel to ag would be animal management. Virtually everyone studies animal management, but very few study ag, and ag is likely to be where you'll see more investment because people always have to eat in one way, shape, or form. So if you can find something like that, your probabilities go up because there should be less people competing for those roles. So there's that logic. But I feel like we could talk about the ups and downs and the perils of academia for an entire episode. So what I want to take us back to is more what was really your inspiration to be who you are today? Either you can take that from the professional you or the academic version.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple factors again, some practical, some out of genuine interest. I think that in terms of why I got into STEM specifically, and specifically physics, I already mentioned I read Stephen Hawking when I was young, but I was also seeing on the internet people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Michio Kaku, and they made physics just sound super cool, and I already thought it was cool because I had really good math and physics teachers my last 2 years of high school. I actually was really bad at math before I would say my third out of 4 years in high school. I was like convinced. I almost failed geometry in my first year of high school, and I was so convinced that I would never do anything with math as a career because I thought I don't get this. This makes absolutely zero sense. Why do I ever need to study it? And then I took a physics class in my third year of high school, and all of a sudden, all the math made sense. Well, actually, in parallel, I had a really good math teacher, but all of a sudden, things just started to make a lot of sense, and I thought, wow, this physics thing actually is really cool. I I can't say the same about chemistry or biology at that time. They're cool now, but I still didn't study them. So I was getting at the time as I was getting closer to university, I was starting to get more into STEM and more mathematics and science. And this had like followed a phase that was filled with history. I still really like history, but history I think for the longest time in school was my favorite subject. But realistically, I was thinking even back then, like, okay, what am I exactly going to do with my history degree? I'm not entirely sure. Like maybe I can work in a museum, I guess. I like museums, but that seems like kind of hard and there's only so many museums and a lot of people seem like to really like history like me. So I thought practically I should probably do something with STEM. And so just by chance of just starting to like it and then thinking, okay, it seems like STEM is like the thing that people uh are promoting as like what you should study for, like, let's say a good job, whatever that means. I was like, yeah, sure. Uh I'll do that. So yeah, I would say there was no one, let's say, directly in my life who is a scientist or was, studying um the stuff that I ended up studying. But I think I also just had a very understanding family who mostly just trusted my judgment in terms of like they never try to push me to be like, you need to be an engineer or you really need to be a doctor of medicine. They were just like, if this is what you really like and you're really good at it and you want to do it, then sure, that you should do it. So I think having kind of the free reign to like let myself just choose what I want helped a lot to just let me follow the path that I picked.
No, I think, like you say, as someone who has specifically looked at careers and how someone's historical background shapes their experience, the family side, I can 100% see the fact that it's people who have a supportive family, whether that be the examples of academics within the family or just someone who's generally in their corner, is so profound just to support the individual going forward. So completely have seen that in various different students that I interviewed when I was doing my research. But outside of that, whether you want to take this on your from the family side or from a different take on this, how would you say then your heritage has shaped your journey?
Yeah, just for some disclosure, yeah, my family is originally from the Philippine Islands. Both my parents were born there, but my dad grew up in the United States. He moved when he was really young, and my mom grew up in the Philippines. So I don't know exactly what that makes me, in terms of like a second or one and a half gen or whatever. But to be honest, when I was first starting out as a physics major in college, I and as a PhD student even, I didn't really think about the lack of representation. I mean, there's not that many uh, Filipino American physics majors, at least when I was in school. There's some, but we definitely don't make up a majority by any means. So I was aware that there wasn't like other people who shared my heritage per se, but I wouldn't say it had a negative effect on me at the time. I don't think I really um, thought about it too much. I think I've had the fortune of being in environments, learning environments where everyone was very accepting and didn't make uh, a big deal of being different, whether that's through heritage or gender or whatever. But now that I'm past the PhD stage and I'm like a working professional, I do kind of think what it means now more to be what it means to be a role model and how to set good examples for scholars who share a similar background. So, for example, this past year I was invited by a um, I guess I forgot the exact club name, but they're basically a club at California State University, Long Beach, and I believe it's like the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers. I think that's like the actual title. And I believe the president is also has a Filipino heritage, and so they really wanted me to talk about, how that connects to what I do now or how that's influenced my trajectory. And I was just honest in saying that, there's not really anyone in my family who I particularly looked up to follow this career, but again, the support that I've had was really important. But I do think a little bit more nowadays of thinking, if there are scholars who share a similar background. Um, to me, how do I connect authentically in a way to them and set a good example for them? Because I think when you are one of the few examples of someone from your background in a field, there does seem to be a little bit more of a weight on you to set a good example and to not um, set a negative example, for example. Keep saying example, but anyways.
No, you're honestly fine. One of the things, though, I think, like you say, the example of more personal heritage based on ethnicity or, like you say, on class, because for a lot of people, if you're first generation, that can have a dramatic impact. Equally, if the education system is
Mhm.
completely different. I know I've spoken to scholars before on here who have been their first generation coming into the US education system, and that can be profoundly different because their parents can't compare that to where they've come from. For example, if you the person who was on the previous interview was their parents emigrated from Europe,
Mhm.
and the European education system across all the various nations are broadly similar in a lot of cases, whereas the American system is vastly different. And don't get me wrong, pros and cons of both, but as a result, it makes the individuals, the parent and child, struggle to have that context to be able to support. Okay, like we were saying earlier about geometry, our maths topic is entirely linked together, so we don't have the various separations by. You basically seem to separate them into the topic areas, whereas we seem to have them all as you either pass all of maths or you fail all of maths. So you can't be great at, let's say, algebra and trigonometry, but awful at calculus. As
Mm,
an example, you
that's interesting.
so which don't get me wrong, in that respect, if there is an area of maths that someone struggles with, that is really hard to work in the UK system because there's no way of being able to identify and support an individual if they struggle on just one area. Whereas in the US system, in theory, you could.
Theory. Yeah. I will say actually one thing I wanted to mention as well in terms of like family and heritage and backgrounds is that I think I failed to mention, and I'll mention now, is that my family definitely values education and valued education a lot. I'm actually, I think, I wouldn't say a rarity, but both of my sets of grandparents, or at least, I think at least three out of four of my grandparents all went to college back in the Philippines, which
Hmm.
um, was not necessarily that common back then. And so I think we've had, for at least two generations, a very big emphasis on making sure education was a priority for the children. And so I I definitely acknowledge I've had opportunities that my parents were willing to, pay for in terms of I was able to go to a private school for most of my uh pre-university educate well, all of my pre-university education, which in America, the differences in private and public education can be stark depending on what part of the country you live in. And so I think my family's willingness to invest in me and my education and allow me to, and while also allowing me to just basically go after whatever I wanted, I think is definitely an advantage that not everyone necessarily has. So I'm very grateful for having had that upbringing. And so I think that it is it is very context dependent, I think, in terms of how someone navigates the chances they're given, right? I mean, I could have taken my education and studied something else completely different and have a completely different career. Maybe I could have just said, no, I don't want the education. I just want to go work after university or after high school. Um, I don't know how well that would have went with my family, but we'll never know. So yeah, all I'm trying to say is just that I think taking advantages of the opportunities that you're given is definitely something that's been a recurring theme in my career. I've noticed where sometimes things don't go your way, but then something else lands on your lap, and then you take advantage of that. And so, uh, yeah, that's basically what I say about that.
No, I get that. And whilst this next question might seem to guess like it is deliberately planned and that all academics seem to have a bookshelf behind them in the videos, it's definitely not the case, but it does seem to be a common theme. So I'd love to know, you've already said about one book that has fundamentally shaped your academic journey, but I would love to know if there's anything else that stands out, particularly if you have one, maybe let's say of fiction. Let's because you gave a non-fiction example.
Ooh.
Have you got a fiction example that shaped your experience?
Oh, a fiction example. That's a really good question. Oh man. I used to read fiction a lot more before I went off to university. I feel like my fiction has really my fiction reading has slowly started to pick back up, but I don't think there's a particular fictional book that necessarily shaped my scientific career. I can say, in terms of books that I've really enjoyed that I was reading back then, I liked Harry Potter a lot. That was you could find me reading a lot of the Harry Potter books when I was a kid. Um, Kind of gave me a weird sense of like what I thought school could be like as a younger person. That's not how school really looks like. But yeah, I wasn't really into sci-fi as a kid, which is kind of funny. A lot of people think with what I do now and my educational history that I was really into sci-fi, but I really was not. Um, but I liked a lot of movies that were sci-fi, but books not so much.
Hmm. Is there a particular movie that stands out for you then in that area?
Star Wars. I
Hmm.
just really like Star Wars a lot, so always have, always will.
No, if I'm honest, I always gravitated more towards Stargate or Babylon 5, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Man of culture.
my dad's a massive sci-fi fan. I will say I read more fantasy, but I like sci-fi
Mm,
TV series, and I will say I'm very excited for a Stargate revival. But Babylon 5, from a character depth perspective, is
mm,
probably by far one of the sci-fi series I still think. Yes, it's aged now graphic wise, but its context is so relevant. Uh,
sure.
but yeah, admittedly, I'm also a massive fan of Star Wars, so.
Yay. Good to know.
Yeah, so Star Wars, Star Trek, I do think all of it takes a lot for the sci-fi series to really miss. It's not impossible. There are some awful
Mm,
sci-fi series, but the
that's true.
most have redeeming qualities. But yeah, so in terms of the next area, this is more thinking about the pivotal moments in your academic or professional journey. And one of the things I always am curious about when speaking to any academic or professional is what really excites you about what you do currently.
Currently, I think what really excites me is the prospect, and not just the prospect, but there's actually demonstrable proof now that the work that we've been doing is being noticed by people in the California state government and will be used to inform decisions on how to make the state safer. And so I'm very excited that the work I'm doing is helping, the state that I grew up in, the communities. I've lived I've basically lived in California my whole life, but in different for university, I went to different parts of California. So I've lived in disparate parts of California, and so I feel really connected to the state from that point of view, and to know that the work we're doing at NASA Ames and the Bay Area Environmental Research Institute is going to just try and make this place safer is a great feeling, I think. And I think that's definitely what motivates me to uh, not just have done the work that I've already done, but also keep working on the hard problems that keep coming up. Because I think that there's always going to be challenges, and there are still hard problems to solve. But when you can see that there is just so much benefit that can be provided to not just you, but to others, it just kind of motivates you to work a little harder to get it done, I think.
And it's equally interesting for most people who don't necessarily see the interconnected side of science research or research that's conducted. Equally, if your work is adding an element of safety and it's looking into the environmental changes for, like you say, wildfire preventions, that'll also say that'll help infrastructure work because the various
Mhm.
different organizations that will be looking at how California, from my understanding, is one of the drier states.
Yes.
And as a result, getting water from place A to place B is a massive logistical challenge. So things like that can be a massive area for your research to feed into, even if it's not a direct area of your personal impact.
Right. I do think that improving the overall infrastructure as well as helping not just, let's say, the state government, but like, firefighting agencies, the more that we can prevent these things from happening, the more lives we're trying to, keep out of harm's way. So I I definitely see the interconnectedness more in my professional work. And maybe that's possibly just a function of being at like a NASA center that has a lot of connections to both the public and the private sectors as well, and also the government. So I think kind of going from a really abstract but still enjoyable like PhD topic to something that is more applied and has people kind of counting on the results of your team's work puts uh, just puts kind of our, I almost want to say society, but it just puts a lot of things into perspective just in terms of um, the impact that we can have. So
So you pretty much answered the next question that I had, but I suppose with that, what do you hope to achieve? What is the tangible
mm.
goal for yourself, whether that's for your next step or just generally?
Yeah, what do I hope to achieve? I mean, there are some tangible things I'd say. I would like to write a book one day. Like I'd like, or two actually. I'd like to write like a technical, like sciencey physics math book, but I'd also like to write like a novel. So, which is a really huge undertaking. It's a little bit separate from work. From work side, I'd also uh I'm in the process of trying to publish a paper for a while now, and it would be targeted in a nature affiliated journal, which I'm not like one to really care too much about journal brands or whatever, but I would like to get this paper out because I do think it's tied a lot to the work that we're doing right now with the wildfire resilience. And I think just it would be good because there's an opportunity to not only uh, you know present the work, but also we're also going to share a lot of like the code and like the documentation of how to use it and access the data that we're creating. And so I think there's just like a lot of mutually beneficial processes there that can get achieved if I publish that thing. So I'm really trying to publish that as soon as possible. Um, and I'd like to, I don't have like an exact number, but I'd like to mentor more interns. I had about 5 interns last year over the summer, and it was a really enjoyable experience. And I've had opportunities like that to mentor both as a graduate student and here in my current role. But I'd like to keep doing it as much as possible. Um, but yeah, I guess those are kind of like the tangible things.
And I suppose like you say, I think the mentoring thing is something that I always think that there's such an investment of time, but you're paying it forward as well because you never know how those interns that you mentor may potentially come back in touch with you in a later. Not that that's the goal, but it does happen. And I know most people, regardless of where they're at with the PhD, often in touch with their examiner and the PhD supervisors long after they graduate, uh, unless the examiner has failed them for whatever reason, then they will probably have less to do with that particular examiner. But
Right.
that is a niche area of post academic life that hopefully many people don't have. I've not met many in that camp. From what, but yeah,
That's good. I will say as a someone I did both private tutoring and also doing like internship mentoring in graduate school, and like the I think it's funny. I think that you don't really see the, let's say, maybe the outcomes of it. Like, yes, the intern will give a presentation and we'll have a deliverable at the end, and it's all nice and good. But I find the most gratifying parts is just like the aftermath when it's kind of already all done and past. But I had this one student who I tutored when they were, I think, a second or a third year in university, and then they ended up coming to UC Irvine for their PhD, and I didn't know they were coming to UC Irvine for their PhD. And they just told me when they saw me in the hall, they're like, "Oh, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that tutoring session you gave me, like, 3 summers ago or whatever." And I'm just like, "Oh wow, like
mm.
that's great." I'm really happy to hear that. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to like quantify. I mean, those are not really like quantifiable things, but it's just those kinds of interactions that make it all feel worth it in the end.
I think that as well, though, is both part of the benefit and part of the problem. Those relationships are qualitative rather than
Mm.
quantitative, and you can have a massive impact on someone's life, but it's very, very hard to measure that till you can look back at 20 years in the future. The impact of
I
that is fundamental.
totally. One quick thing I want to say is that I this past year, 2025, I went to my old high school. I'm actually only about 40 miles away from where I grew up, so pretty close. So I went back to my old high school because my high school math teacher, the one that really kind of opened my eyes to mathematics, was retiring, and so I went there to her retirement celebration just so I could tell her like, yeah, look at me now. Like I
Mm,
wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. So thank you so much for making math understandable to me. However many 15 or so years ago. Because now I'm a PhD in physics and I work at NASA. So you did
mm.
this, you know. So yeah,
No, like you say, I think as someone who's taught it in college, in different colleges, that can be such a gratifying experience for the teacher to have. It doesn't happen a lot when someone comes back, but I would never say if you are someone in a position where you think, oh yeah, my teacher won't ever want to hear from me. They probably will. Especially if you're someone who just wants to say what experience they've had on you. You'd be surprised. You probably make that person's not necessarily even their day, maybe they even their year based on that the phone call or email that you drop them.
yeah,
So.
yeah, totally. I've made it a point to reach back to some very influential teachers, and it's always gone very well. It's never gone bad. So I'd say if people are
Mhm.
hesitant to do it, just do it.
Yeah, definitely. So, thinking more of you can take this in your PhD field or your industry currently. What is a question in your field that keeps you up at night?
Hmm, that's a good one. Um, that keeps me up at night. I guess in a kind of a broad sense, there's always this like, what else could I be doing that could get us closer to our goal of making the state safer for my professional work? Um, there's a very concrete question that I I do have, like a research question that it's basically, can I apply AI to this particular problem and would it go well in terms of like would it actually be an improvement of what currently exists in the field? The only reason I haven't had a chance to do it is because I have so many other things to do with work that this is one of those times where I really wish I had like an intern or a set of interns that could try and just like go after this problem, that I present to them and be like, I really wish I could do it, but I'm busy doing other things. So like I'm happy to like mentor you guys and see if you guys can figure it out. Um and I'm trying to think another question to me up night. I guess I thought about this actually in grad school. This is for my PhD work on the black holes. One of the things that always kept me up was just like, again, it's always this question of like, is there something else I'm missing when I'm doing my measurement or my analysis or my um when I'm presenting, like I presented like a measurement and so I have a number and like that number has an error bar and I'm just so sometimes paranoid in terms of like, man, but like what was there anything else I could have done to make this measurement more accurate or more precise? But I will say based on my experiences in grad school, I do feel like I'm proud to say that I do feel like we exhausted or I exhausted all everything I could possibly think of. And I think when you at the end of at the end of the day, the paper has to get published, right? So you got to put something out
Hmm.
there. But I think it's better to know, like, I'm just not the kind of person, in my opinion, to just like, if I have a lingering question, I'm going to answer it. Like, I'm not going to leave things, it's kind of like a no stone unturned approach.
Hmm.
And so to go from like my first draft of my papers that I've noticed like in during my PhD to like the actual publication, was such a long process. And I know this is off topic, but basically, I'm just trying to say
Mm,
that I really felt like I had those questions that kept me up at night in terms of like, what am I missing in this draft? And how do I make sure the publication is like not perfect, but it's the best that I could have done. And I do feel like the times I have brought something to publication, it is the best that I could have done. And I think that's
mm.
all you can hope for at the end of the day.
No, I can definitely see that. The other thing I would say, which I half expected, but I'm glad you didn't. The whole point where normally when I think about someone who's thinking about space and the really abstract topics is something completely out there, like what is there anything on the other side of a black hole type thing that is really unfeasible to ever measure at this point of technology that we have. Being as you said about a sci-fi interest, I thought maybe you'll take that type of line of it.
Well, I will just say very quickly that there are questions they're not quite that. They are kind of scientific, but they're just more um like yeah, for example, for black holes, we actually just don't really know what happens at like the very center from a scientific point of view. Like the laws of physics just don't explain that because we don't really know how to like incorporate effects from quantum mechanics at those scales with such intense gravity. And so I used to think I'd be the kind of person. I used to really want to do string theory. Thank you, Michio Kaku. But at some point, I was like, you know what? I just don't think I'm cut out for that. So I'll let
Mm.
other people take care of that. But it does make me wonder every now and then, like what does happen? Like, I would just like to know.
Yeah, I've got to admit, I think I'll keep it in this as a sci-fi interest. I don't think it'll ever be a scientific interest, but I'll enjoy it from a fictional point of view till it's
Mhm.
proven, if it ever gets proven. But I suppose on the other side, what's a contrarian take on your field? This can be the field as a
Contrarian.
whole or generally.
Contrarian. Um. Ooh. I don't know if it's like contrarian. Um. Okay. Well, I have one for like my professional, well, for my PhD work. A contrarian take that I think I've established since I think my whole PhD topic was on this basically. It was like I think that we're more confident, or I should just say people are just more overconfident than they really should be in their measurements of black hole masses, which depending on the situation, it's very context dependent and depends on the specifications of the telescope and all these other factors. But I think as a whole, I think a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, but I think some people are a bit more overconfident than they really should be. And this is not to say that people shouldn't have any confidence. I think you should have, you should be able to back up what you say with some matter of confidence, but it should be supported by the evidence. I think, and I think that's one thing I'm really uh, appreciative of what my advisor taught me. He was a very, very skeptical person in the sense that you just really have to like keep trying to prove yourself wrong until the only thing you can say is, "Oh, well, actually, I'm not wrong because I've just exhausted all these tests or whatever." Um, in my current profession, this might just be for science as a whole, but my contrarian take is that like we really need to stop like trying to wear so many hats, and that I think I don't know. This is tied to like the whole publishing and like writing proposals and grants and all that stuff. I really dislike that process a lot. I don't think anyone really does, really. Maybe some people do. But I do think that if we could all just do less of that and more of the actual science, which I know we have to fund it through these other mechanisms, but I'm just saying in an ideal world, we would be better off. I know that's contrarian, but that's just, yeah, a gripe
No,
I have.
I suppose that moves me into an area which the question that I would normally ask in that, but I want to take it into a slightly different take with this,
Mhm.
is like you said, we have to inherently wear different hats. And now, normally, I'd ask you how you juggle your time between outreach, teaching, research.
Mhm.
But that's inherently because you need to wear different hats to do that. I always think you need to group them together because they're all fundamentally, if you do them
Yeah.
all, do one thing really well, you're doing all three. Your research
Mm,
should lean to teaching, it should also lean to outreach, and it should
mm,
lean to research.
hmm
So I would love to know your take on that. If you have your ideal route of being able to do all those things in one very neat path, how would that look?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like I want to have my cake and eat it too, but basically, it's I would want to do. I'd like to split all my time, or split my time pretty evenly between those three things, without having to worry about how to fund like the research part.
Hmm.
Which again, yeah, I mean, I know I feel like a lot of researchers people like, yeah, well, that's a pipe dream. I'm like, yeah, I know, but like, I think
Yeah.
if a lot of people had that choice, they would want it like that. I think that, and I don't think it's actually that crazy in a way because I think, um, I mean, if we're just gonna call it how it is, I mean, money is an important part of our society, and like researchers and mentors and teachers all need to eat, right? But
Hmm.
it's not unheard of like, I think in some ways, some of the best some of the best scholars who've I've by best I mean people I look up to in terms of and just admire how they go about their work have somehow been able to orchestrate it so that they get it as close to what I just described as possible. Um, and they have made a lot of good decisions and are very shrewd about how they set boundaries and um, just know how to manage their hat wearing in a way that it isn't really just like this this specific divide or step function divide between everything, and it all just is like one holistic kind of system they've
Hmm.
built that all kind of flows into each other very naturally. And I'm still in some ways trying to figure that out for myself, because most of my work is very technical. I do mentoring stuff when I can. I have my YouTube channel where I do just try and teach stuff when I can. But it does feel like those are still kind of separate islands in a way. And I'm trying to find, in my case, a good way to unify all those three things.
Well, no, but I think it's a fair point that there should be a way of unifying it. I personally am of a view that the holistic view is the best way of doing it.
Hmm
So yeah, that's my take.
Agreed. I think one thing I'm not trying to hate. I mean, I'm not trying to hate on like either side. I've been getting really interested in like this. I read this book basically that was like an Eastern mysticism approach to like physics, which sounds very woo woo. I know, but like there were some aspects of it where I was like, you know what? I kind of like this idea of like holistically looking at systems, as opposed to thinking like, you know, this thing is a separate thing from this thing, or like let's take the body for example. Like, if there's something wrong with like my knees, I've had knee problems in my life, then it's just like it's a knee problem. But like a holistic approach would be like, no, there's like a whole body problem that you have to like sort of address at like all different parts of your body to like fix this pain in this one specific area. Whereas like perhaps maybe a more Western point of view is medicine point of view would just be like, we got to focus just on the knee, think about anything else, which is kind of, you know, overgeneralization, but that's how I would. Right.
No, I definitely think that's a fair point. And like you say, I think the removal from a holistic point of view often comes with a number of different problems,
Mhm.
because then you have the separation. Having been someone whose research is focused on teaching and education, and equally worked in environments that are that the separations of the subject, that taking you all the way back to what you said earlier about the not knowing how to apply maths,
Mm,
until it clicked with physics. That's a
right.
key point because it's never taught in a way that applies to the other subjects. And maths links to geography, geography links to history,
Mm,
history
yep.
links to art, etc., etc.
Yes.
And
Yes.
but because I'm mindful of our time, and one of the things I want to move us into is the quick fire round. So
Sure.
rather than going into the same deep dives that we have been doing,
Yep.
I'd love to know your take on these 10 questions in 10 words or less. So,
Okay. We'll try and do it. I'll count.
so starting off with, who is a character or individual that you admire? They can be fictitious or they can be real.
Um, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather.
Okay. What is a life lesson that has stuck with you?
Be yourself, even if it's hard.
Okay. A subject that you dismissed in school that you wished you explored more.
French.
Okay. What is the most recent book that you've read? I will also allow academic books if that helps.
It's not one, thankfully. I read Empire of AI by Karen Howe.
Hmm. And if you had a theme song, what would it be?
Gosh, theme song.
The cheat way of looking at this is it's normally your alarm clock is supposed to be your theme song.
No, I don't think I want my alarm clock to be my theme song. Oh, this is really hard. I I'm trying to like I used to have songs that are like, this is like the song of my life, or like this is the song that describes me right now. Um, One song that keeps coming up that's been around for a long time. Anyways, it's Starlight by Muse, basically.
Okay. And what was your favorite thing about your academic journey?
Favorite thing. Traveling.
Okay. And on the flip, what is the worst thing about your academic experience?
Worst thing. Paper writing.
Hmm. And how would you like to be seen by other people?
I feel like I have a very meta answer to this, but that's not really it. Kind, useful, funny, intelligent. I guess, yeah.
Okay. And if you had to pick a completely new field of study that's completely removed from what you're doing, what would it be?
Oh, um, ancient history. I don't know of what, but ancient history.
Okay. And if you were giving advice to a student who is just starting out, what would it be?
Don't be afraid. Ask a lot of questions.
Okay. Well, those are the 10 questions in 10 words or less, but this is the rapid fire extended version, which is
Okay.
just more looking at first choice that comes to your mind. So it's either ors rather
Mhm.
than your responses. So, are you a morning person or a night owl?
Night owl.
Deep dive or broad strokes?
Deep dive.
Collaborative or solo?
Collaborative.
Field work or lab work?
Ugh, there needs to be a third one for neither. But just kidding. This is hard. I don't know what counts this being in an observatory for an astronomy thing. Is that a field or a lab? I guess that's the lab in a way because you're not outside, you're inside. I'll go with lab work then. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe I should reframe that inside and out or outside.
yeah. I'll go with lab work because it's inside. I'm not so
Okay.
much outside. Yeah.
Teaching or mentoring?
Oh gosh, is there really a difference? I mean, this is a hard one. I'll go with mentoring because I feel like that encompasses the teaching I do. I don't think when I teach, I'm really mentoring that effectively. So I'll go with
Mhm.
mentoring.
And this isn't either or, but this is more of a fun way of thinking about your life. If they made a movie about your research, who would play you and what would the title be?
If they made a movie about my research, who would play me? What would the title be? Okay, I think they'd probably cast. Well, I don't know. I have been told I look like two particular celebrities: Bruno Mars and Henry Golding. And apparently, Henry Golding is actually an actor, so I think they'd have to go with Henry Golding. I think is that's his name. Um, he's the guy he was the main actress in actor, sorry, in Crazy Rich Asians. But
Hmm.
if they made a movie about your research, I guess he'd play me. And what would the title be? Probably be something like Misfit Research or like I don't know, like something about uh non or maybe be like non-linear discovery or something like that. That sounds like more of like a self-discovery thing more than my actual
Mhm.
research. But like I feel like the pick would actually be more about like the decision making in my life and like the pivotal events that changed it more than the actual science, probably.
No, you never know, and who knows? Uh,
Hmm,
so the next few questions are a bit more open, but they are
yeah.
more just for don't by any means take feel like you have to take a long time with any of these. But I want to explore more the unexpected side of your academic perspective. So,
Okay.
what's the most unexpected turn your academic journey took?
Most unexpected turn. Probably coming here to NASA Ames Research Center as in their science division. That was not planned at all. Happy it happened.
Okay, and now thinking about the inevitable side of academia, regrettably, the rejection file. This is
Hmm.
my take on the Room 101 type question. Share one rejection that ultimately led to something better for you.
Um, Objection that's somewhere better. I would say, okay, I see paper as an option. I'm gonna say the fact that my second paper I ever wrote did not get accepted on the first try, and we had to go through revisions. I was able to bring on 2 extra people to the paper who really helped me out, and it ultimately led to just a better result in paper, honestly, and it just, shared in the reward of publishing, I suppose, but I was happy I did that. Yeah.
Good. And if you could go back at any point in your academic journey, what's one decision that you'd defend and one decision that you'd change?
Mm, I defend, um oh gosh, one decision I defend and one that I change. Ooh, I think I defend coming to UC Irvine for my PhD. I've had mixed feelings about it, like back and forth over the years, but I'd still ultimately say it was the right choice. But what I would change is while I was there, I would probably have been one decision. Uh, I would just have been more what's the right word I'm looking for? I would have displayed more agency with my especially with my advisor. I guess I would have pushed advocate for myself more. I know that's like a set of decisions, but basically
Hmm.
some sort of mental switch there.
Okay, now I want you to complete the next sentence, which is everyone thinks my research is about X, but it's really about Y.
Research is about black holes, but it's really about earth science these days. People
Okay.
haven't realized that change yet.
So next, these are the tail end of the questions, and this is more about the surprising side of your path to this point.
Mhm.
If you were advising a student starting out, so we've covered this to some degree very briefly, what would be the advice that you would tell them that you think they should know about academia generally?
This one's gonna be kind of an unpopular one, but I'm gonna be honest. If you really, 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 really want to be a PhD, oh sorry, a professor or a tenured faculty, then you really just need to max out in terms of finding the most prestigious program you can get into. That increases your chances considerably. It's not the only way to do it, but and also just think really hard if you really want to invest the time to go down that path, then just know do the research in terms of how likely that's going to turn out for you. Honestly, and if you still want to do it, then go right ahead. Just you should be educated with your decisions, I think.
Mhm. And what question would you ask my next guest, whoever they might be?
How do you want to show up for how do you show up for the people who look up to you?
Okay. And the question from my last guest for you was how did you actually get into your field?
My field is such a broad thing, but I guess it all comes back to having that really good math teacher in high school. Like that was definitely like the first domino in that direction.
Okay. And as we come to a close, I want you to think this is a time capsule that you're going to leave behind for the future you in 5 years' time to review. What is a message that you would leave that you would hope you would have achieved in 5 years' time?
Hi, future Kyle. I really hope that you've written that book that you've been talking about in terms of a a physics or math educational book that's not a textbook. I also really hope that you bought a nicer car than the one you have right now. But if you haven't, good on you for saving, I suppose. Um, and I hope that you're in a place where you feel like you have what you need to be content and happy for the rest of your life.
Okay, I think that's a very lovely time capsule to leave for yourself. And hopefully, the book is certainly been published.
Yes.
So, this is the final question. In 10 years, what do you hope someone will say about your work?
I hope that in 10 years that someone says, wow, the work that not just Kyle, but the team that Kyle's been on has made possible things, advances in our understanding of the environment, the safety of California, um, or just improve the overall infrastructure to a point that we couldn't have even thought that was possible, and that it wouldn't have happened without their efforts in 2025 and 6. You know?
Okay, and Kyle, I would like to thank you very much for joining me and sitting down with me sitting down with scholars. But before you go, if someone wants to find out more about your work, get in touch, learn a bit more about what you're doing, or follow along for other content that you teach, how can they best contact you, get in touch, or follow?
Yeah, so all my social media platform usernames are just my name, Kyle Kabasares. So that's on Instagram, on X, Blue Sky. I'm also on YouTube. If you just search Kyle Kabasares, it's my channel. I also have a website, kylekabasares.com, and my email is kylekabasares@gmail.com. It's just all over for all my stuff. So I don't have a preference. Email is fine. Instagram is fine. X is fine, whatever, or LinkedIn too, if you're also on LinkedIn as well. Um, that works as well. So preference. Feel free to message.
Okay, and thank you again for joining me, Kyle. I will make sure that those all those various handles and contacts areas are shared as well, so that people can find you on that. So, thank you again for joining me on Sitting Down with Scholars, and all the best for the next steps in your academic journey.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It was a pleasure. And yeah, looking forward to seeing